Our society doesn't eat those.
Our society here in the United States doesn't eat those. What else?
Well, we view them as, especially the dogs and cats, as companion animals.
Right.
And the whales are just viewed as, I don't know, not cute necessarily, but definitely not acceptable. It's not acceptable for us to eat them.
Something beautiful we want to protect. Same with the gorillas usually.
Also very intelligent.
Also very intelligent. We consider them intelligent. Right. So where do we learn who and what it's okay to eat? Our parents.
Culture.
Where do they? Our culture. Where do our parents learn it from? Their parents, and they learned it from
the 50s.
Their parents.
How good are you?
Right. So.
Well, the 50s is when the nutritional guides came out.
Right.
So
Yeah.
founded by the dairy industry.
And that had a major impact. So from our parents and from culture. Right.
And I say also, I mean, some people learn guided by scripture.
Right, by religious issues and things like that. Sure, those are all factors. So my point is that who and what we eat isn't necessarily determined by a particular biological imperative. It's much more about things like habit and tradition and culture. Just to use another example, junk food, not a biological imperative, but we often eat lots of it because of habit, tradition, and culture. So in the same way, we make a lot of choices about who and what we eat. So these two little mini exercises that I just did, what's called the chicken crate exercise and the little survey we did, those are two small examples of humane education that I use in a presentation that I give called Please Pass the Gorilla, the Stories of Those We Eat. And it's a presentation that I give that's about the lives and deaths of farmed animals. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it more, but that's just one example of humane education and how you can use it. And as you can see, there was some curiosity built in there. There was some providing of information. There was some hopefully making connections and maybe feeling some empathy and those sorts of humane education elements that I talked about before. So why bring humane education to students? Well, there are a lot of reasons. Here are some. First of all, you can strike at the roots. We spend at least 13 years in school, and that's not including college. That's a lot of time to be learning different kinds of facts and information, not learning different kinds of other facts and information, developing the lenses through which we see the world, learning certain kinds of biases, learning to think critically and creatively or not. So humane education really can get at the core of that educational time and help youth, help people learn to develop a different lens through which to see the world, to really develop a global context. So they're not just looking at the world piecemeal, they're not just looking at what affects me, what do I want for my life, what am I going to do for my career, what's going to make me happy, but they're really looking at how are my choices impacting people all over the world, the planet as a whole, animals all over, and making choices that have a much broader impact, a broader and deeper impact. So humane education really has the power to do that. And other types of animal advocacy are really important, like getting a particular law changed or getting this restaurant to stop serving foie gras or rescuing this small group of animals. But humane education really strikes at the roots and gets at the core and can have a much deeper and broader impact. That's one reason it's really important, especially bringing it to students. It helps reveal the interconnectedness. So regardless of what kind of issue you're talking about, if you're talking about poverty, you're talking about global warming, you're talking about factory farming, you're talking about different kinds of products, you're talking about more philosophical things like rights or suffering, all of that is interconnected. All those sorts of things have a component dealing with human rights, animal protection, environmental preservation, and issues of our culture. So if you're showing people the interconnectedness of those sorts of issues, again, they're making those broader choices that have a larger impact. And they're not just looking at their own personal choices, but they're looking at the systems in the world and seeing what's destructive and figuring out ways to transform and make them more positive and restorative. And in addition, as humane educators, if we're focused on talking about interconnected issues, then people who are interested in those common ground issues, like environmental issues and human rights issues, they're going to be more open to what we're saying, and they're also going to see the connections about what they're passionate about and how that relates to animal protection issues. Humane education can offer engagement with real-life issues, which is something that students are really hungry for. They want what they're learning to matter. They want it to relate to their life. They want it to mean something, and Humane Education can bring them that. Likewise, Humane Education can really nurture change makers. One example that I like to use is my boss, Zoe Weil, who's the co-founder and president of the Institute for Humane Education. Back 25 years ago, when she started doing humane education herself, she taught a summer course through a college for middle school kids, and it was about animal protection issues. One day they learned about issues of product testing. This boy was so horrified by what he learned and so inspired that he went home that night. He created his own leaflets by hand. The next day at lunch, he was passing them out on a street in Philadelphia. Overnight, by learning accurate information, being inspired to think critically and creatively, and learning about positive choices, he had become a change maker. Likewise, as part of my job, I'm skimming the media all the time. So I'm reading all sorts of stories about students learning about social justice issues, animal protection issues. They're inspired, they're engaged, they're encouraged, and they go out and do positive things in their school, in their community, and in the broader global context. So there's real potential there for worldwide global change. Humane education can easily adapt to subjects. It doesn't matter what subject it is, math, social studies, science, whatever. There's a place for humane education there. And humane education can reach thousands a year. So let's think about what education is for and what it should be for. Well, I've heard some educational pundits talk about education should be for maintaining conformity and social stability, or it should be for gaining job skills, or it should be ensuring that everybody learns a core academic set of knowledge, the whole no child left behind sort of thing. So what do we want education to be about? Do we want it to be about those sorts of things? Or do we want education to be about raising a generation that has the tools and the skills and the motivation to create a humane world? And to create that world by learning to problem solve creatively, to think up new restorative systems instead of sticking with the old destructive systems, to look through that new lens of a humane world through whatever career choices they make, through whatever life choices they make. So let's look at some of the things that might be in the classroom. First of all, we're going to start with some of the sort of core curricular things that you're likely to find in most kinds of classrooms. There's bias in everything that we're learning. There's bias from the school system's perspective, from the administrator's perspective, from the teacher's perspective, from the stuff that's in the textbooks, from the books that kids are reading and not reading, and so on. Let's just use a couple of examples. Columbus Day in Columbus. Many of you as kids might have learned the poem in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right. And what's the main thing that we learned about Columbus? That he discovered America. Well, of course we know that's not true because there were already people living there. He didn't discover it. And we often don't hear about the things like slavery and genocide and environmental destruction and animal slaughter that occurred when Columbus sailed up to the West Indies. We don't hear about those things, okay? The kinds of things we're learning about are going through a certain lens. They're biased and they're skewed. And not because necessarily people are doing that on purpose. Let's look at something else. Let's look at the food pyramid. Back when I was a kid, it was the 4 food groups. It was the meat group, and the milk group, and the fruits and vegetable group, and the bread and cereal group. And now we have the pyramid, and I'm sorry that you can't read the little labels. So thankfully we do have the meat and beans group, but the calcium focused group is still considered the milk group. And of course this is drawn in large part from the meat and egg and dairy industries. So in addition to those typical core kinds of curricular things that just come from textbooks and regular academic curriculum, businesses and corporations are now learning that it's a pretty good idea for them to try to get their perspectives and their thoughts into the school system. So they're creating curriculum and activities and lesson plans so that they can try and help determine what kinds of lenses kids are looking through when they see the world, trying to influence the opinions that they have about their corporations and the kinds of things that they're offering and so on. So just as a couple of examples, this is a website called Classroom Energy. This is sponsored by the American Petroleum Institute. They have lessons and activities and those sorts of things, and as you can guess, they're positively skewed toward fossil fuels. Just as another example, this is a Kellogg site all about nutrition. And they have activities and lesson plans, several of which are very serial-oriented, as you can imagine. There are also industries who are really interested in getting their own thoughts and perspectives into schools. I came across, this is from the National Dairy Council, Dairy Dazzling Calcium Carnival. This was this activity booklet to help people learn how to put on a 3-day carnival all about dairy and cows and all those fun things. And I'm not sure what you would do for 3 days, but apparently they thought up enough. And then you may have heard about the milk mustache contest that they sponsor. So they encourage kids to get their milk mustache picture taken and to send it in and potentially win a prize. And then there are also special interest groups who are interested in getting their views into schools. Just as 2 examples, Ringling Brothers, they have their own set of curriculum, lesson plans, sorts of things. This one's about lions. And as you can imagine, when they're talking about the treatment of animals, that's skewed very positively. The other example is from the American Kennel Club. So they are offering lesson plans and activities that focus on things like how to pick the right breed and about dog ownership and those sorts of things. So they're trying to get their viewpoints across in their lesson plans and activities.
Just a second.
No worries. So this last example, this is a fairly recent one. This is from the North Carolina Association for Biomedical Research, and this is a free downloadable PDF that you can get from the National Institute for Health. This is the Lucky Puppy, which is a coloring workbook, and it's all about the story of a brother and sister who have a puppy named Lucky who gets sick, so they take the puppy to the vet, and then the vet teaches them all about the wonders of biomedical research and what happens to the animals who are tested on and how they're treated really well, and they help people and animals, and you know, it's a wonderful thing. And at the end, the boy wants to be a vet and the girl wants to be an animal researcher so that she can help people and animals. And this particular coloring book is targeted to ages 6 to 9, so it's a much younger set. So those are just some examples. So let's look a little bit at humane education in action now. These are just a small number of examples. In Southern California, there's a young man named Christopher Greenslate who is a social studies teacher. And a few years ago, he decided, he's a graduate of our master's program at the Institute for Humane Education. And a few years ago, he decided he wanted to start teaching a social justice course. So these high school kids would learn about, by choosing whatever they were interested in, human rights issues, animal protection issues, issues of media and culture, and environmental preservation. And it's been incredibly successful. It's a very popular course. They've made major changes in their school community, major changes in their greater community. They've been featured in contests. They have won contests for their social justice work. It's just been an amazing experience. And Christopher himself has done some terrific things. The $1 Diet Project, anybody heard of that? It's he and his partner spent 30 days, each of them eating on $1 a day. And it was all about that, and it's become so incredibly popular and such a big issue. It was in the New York Times, and it's been all over the news, and now they're writing a book. But that stemmed from their passion about humane education. HERO, Humane Educators Reaching Out, that is actually a coalition of humane education organizations in Florida, and they offer humane education presentations on a variety of topics to a large number of kids each year. There are several regional humane education programs in the United States. This is just a list. That includes the Power of One Humane Education, which is the new one we're forming here in Portland. And as one last example, another one of our master's students recently created a humane education program for a community event. She actually created an entire booklet, and she debuted her program at Orlando's Veg Fest last fall. So you had the table of information, but they also had several interactive activities focused on what happens to chickens and issues about product testing and issues about slavery and environmental preservation issues and how those are all interconnected. It was a really popular program. So let's do some humane education. We're going to do just a couple of examples. This particular one is called True Price, and this helps people focus on the impact of their choices, their product choices on people, animals, and the planet. And you can do this with any number of objects. If you were doing this in a school, you could have kids pull stuff out of their backpacks and so on. I brought 3 items here. There's a bottle of water, a chocolate bar, and a t-shirt. So which one shall we do? Chocolate. Okay. So, is this product a want or a need?
Want.
It's definitely a want, right. So what's the effect of this product on us, on you? Yeah, well, it has lots of calories, so it could potentially be a health issue.
Too much sugar.
A lot of sugar, right? Any positive impacts?
It's not a vegan product, so not necessarily.
Yeah, it's not a vegan product. Might give you a sugar buzz. So what's the impact of this on other people? Positive and negative.
Makes some corporation money.
Makes some corporation money. It does give people jobs, so that's a positive. And one of the
Probably
negatives...
didn't get the chocolate from, probably got the chocolate from one of those harvesters that aren't so nice to their workers. So it probably exploited people.
Right, yeah, so the chocolate probably, most likely came from slave and child labor, right?
You have to scout down the rainforest to get cocoa beans.
Right, yep.
There's probably dairy in it, I think that one.
There's probably dairy in it, which gets to the animals, right? So, no, that's fine. We're moving right on. Right, so it has dairy in it, so that definitely negatively impacts dairy cows.
The packaging.
The packaging, right? So that's an environmental issue. The dyes used for this probably had some toxicity in them. There was probably some sort of pollution. There's the whole transportation cost issue. And we could go on and on and on. And we're just talking about a chocolate bar, right? But that's the power of this sort of thing. And one thing I want to mention is, and then you would talk about, well, what are some MOGO alternatives? MOGO meaning most good, and then how can we find out what we would do from here?